Welcome to the show, Fuck Loneliness. I'm your host, Sharon Pieczenik, and in each episode, I invite a guest on and we discuss the nature of loneliness. Let's hop right into it. Hi guys, I'm speaking with Maria and Anna Duke. They are twins and also the hosts of Bipolar Bicoastal, a podcast that you can listen to, and we'll have the links below so you can find it. Hi guys, thanks for coming.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having us. This is so exciting.
Yeah, so I want to hop in and kind of get a little background first on Bipolar Bicoastal. What is this podcast about?
Sure, yeah. So it's basically, as you said, Anna and I are twins, and we both were diagnosed with bipolar disorder a few years ago. So this past year, we decided to do a podcast kind of exploring what it's like living with bipolar disorder. So each week we do a podcast about different issues related to the disease and like just ways that you can kind of like universally, I think, relate to it. Like we have a lot of listeners who don't know anybody with bipolar disorder besides us, but it tends to be kind of like about, maybe we just recorded one about like shame with bipolar disorder and like how you can feel a little like alone in the disease and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of like trying to destigmatize it, as well as like it's kind of a humorous take on mental health, I think.
Yeah. Let's hop in there. You had said alone with the disorder because so curious about loneliness and being bipolar. Where do they intersect?
Yeah, so for me, I was diagnosed a year before Maria was, a year and a half before Maria was. And so for me, a lot of the loneliness was just not knowing anyone else who had the disease. I think when you hear about mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, a lot of people understand them and relate to them and have experienced something like that, or have a close one who's experienced, like a loved one who's experiencing something like that. But bipolar disorder, I mean, I didn't know anything about it before I was diagnosed with it, except for like a lot of like the whole like, oh, like she's so bipolar, like she's so crazy kind of stuff. So
yeah.
The loneliness of like not having a community around her, people who understood it, was definitely the hardest part, and it still is really lonely. Like even though I know Maria now, and like through doing the show, now that we know more people in our lives who have it, it's still not the norm. And especially, you assume that your family and like your loved ones and like your friends and your peers all understand you at like a certain level, but with this disease, like that's kind of taken away a little bit.
Yeah. And there's also we don't know, like Anne and I were twins, and it's a genetic disorder, so theoretically like other people in our family might have it, but nobody else has been diagnosed. So it's kind of like one of the things in our family. We're also the only twins in our family, so it's like just one more thing that kind of like separates us from the pack. I also think that there's a loneliness to like not being out. So like with the podcast, we kind of chose to disclose to everybody in our lives, and we post about it like on our Facebook pages and stuff like that. And right now, a lot of our listeners, I think, are people who know us personally, but especially with work, like we're both in pretty well, I'm in TV like you, Sharon, but Anna's works on a crisis hotline. So like there's I think like we were both nervous about coming out to people who we work with. And because it is like, it's a very competitive industry, and I think that people, for me, it's like not on my website or anything, because I think like I've heard on sets and stuff like that, people being like, oh, she's like so bipolar, like seeing it as a bad thing. And honestly, even before I got diagnosed or before Anna got diagnosed, like I knew nothing about it, so I also assumed it was like, oh, she's like hot one minute and cold the other, versus like the ones that we have is like literally like a month or whatever long episode, like a month or whatever long episode.
Yeah, the ups and downs.
From minute to minute,
Yeah. So it sounds like it's a fairly isolating mental health issue.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, a lot of, after you first get diagnosed, a lot of it is about like they'll suggest that you find like a support group and stuff like that, but even those are kind of intimidating to join, because so many of those people, especially we got diagnosed fairly young, fairly early, but also have only both experienced like one, I've had multiple depressive episodes, but only one like manic episode. And that's, I think, the more like the harder one to build community around. And so you are talking to people who've had multiple episodes, and it's just kind of scary to be like, wow, is that my future? Like, probably, like, that is going to happen again at some point. And also you kind of, it's hard to relate though at that point, because you have only gone through it the one time. So but
I feel like with loneliness in general, and then with mental health issues, for me, there's a lot of fear, because I've wrestled with a lot of anxiety and depression, and I've had some very big mental health hiccups in my past. That would probably be in parallel to what you guys have gone through in some way. And there's a loneliness to it because of what you were talking about. Like, I don't want to lead the conversation and come out about like, oh yeah, I was batshit crazy once. But, you know, but then when you can speak about it and people are like, oh, okay, me too. And you're like, oh wait, what? Great, I'm not alone. And
exactly.
You didn't freak out when I told you.
The disclosure part of it is so key. That was our first episode of the podcast, was on disclosure, because I don't think you can really get past it without going through that. And I think like what you're saying is so true. Like, you want to make sure that the people that you're talking to about it are like safe and are going to react in the way that you need them to, and not be like, well, you were just a lazy piece of shit for 3 months when you didn't get out of bed. Like, you weren't a very good friend to me for those 3 months. Like, why? Like, that's, you know, and I feel like you already blame yourself so much with those like mental illnesses. Like, you're already kind of beating yourself up over it and being like, am I this like awful person? Like, am I
lazy? No.
And of course, like, the disease is doing that too, right? Like, with depression, like, it's telling you like that you're like, you deserve to be alone, and like, it's a blessing for anyone to talk to you. Well, probably not a blessing, because you don't really feel like that blessed when you're depressed, but and stuff like that. So that was something that we had to think really hard about. Like, was it worth it to risk like negative reactions in order to try to build some sort of community around it and try to make it easier for other people to disclose? And we decided that it was. But honestly, and this is maybe not like the takeaway that people would expect, I think that like the whole COVID thing has really helped with that, because if anyone in our personal lives who we interact with like day to day, we don't have to interact with them anymore, I guess. Like, if they're going to have a negative reaction, we don't have to know about it, which is really nice. I'm like a little bit nervous about going back to like work in person after this, because I don't really know who knows at my job now, and it's like a little bit iffy. So
understandable, because I know that anxiety and depression, as you were saying, kind of is probably more around for the average people. You know, it's part of now in vernacular every day, and so many people are openly talking about it. But bipolar has a certain stigma that people think, ooh, that's big. That's scary. They're gonna go buy Lamborghinis, and then suddenly like,
I bought a Prius.
Wrong too.
I bought a Prius when I was manic.
Were you seriously?
I went on like a shopping spree through Michael's and bought like $300 worth of scrapbooking and supplies, which is not a hobby that I have. Like, that's the other thing too, is like, that's kind of like the joy of like talking about it, but also like the hard part, because it's like, you're right. Like, we were like not in our right minds for like
and it has like real consequences. Like, I spent $14,000 on a car. Like, it was a good decision, but like, I'm not gonna get that back.
I love though how your manic episodes in shopping had like very realistic like pieces to them. It was a Prius, not a Lamborghini. It was Michael's, not like Nordstrom.
I know. And in my case, but in my case, that was really safe. But the fact that Maria had ownership over my debit card after I was hospitalized.
Like, those are mine now.
Like, I had to like beg for like, I had to like beg to like make like really small purchases. Like, my friend gave me a haircut, and then I like gave myself a haircut, and I completely messed up because I was, again, crazy, and like it was so wonky, and my mom was like, you can't get a haircut, like, you can't spend money, and I was like, please help me. Like,
we went to like what, haircuttery to fix it? It's like $10.
So
the other
I know, it's funny. Yeah, or like I went to New York while I was manic, but like I remember like I like took the train there and like sorry.
Our family like jokes like because Maria's so cheap, like we like started like in a very charming way, but we like started noticing that she was like not well because she spent like $80 on clothes one day, like from a secondhand store.
I was
and
like, whoa.
Like, this is not normal.
And they're like, oh my god, she needs help. Like, or like, or like Anna kept buying people presents and stuff like that, which is just like so cute and charming. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's not like it's. There are like scary parts of it, but a lot of it is just like, I don't know, like just meeting a lot of new people and stuff like that. Yeah.
When you're going through episodes, does it feel lonely? Like, are you aware of what's going on, or does that maybe only happen in the depressed side? Or
I felt really lonely when I was manic because it was a really or hypomanic. I mean, okay, so mania is like more intense and like tends to be for shorter periods, and then like hypomania is like more extended periods, and like you can kind of function a little bit. But I only have had one manic episode, but it was like for 4 months or so. So like my family, they all thought that some of them thought I had bipolar disorder, but I hadn't been diagnosed yet, and I didn't think that I did. So it was like there was like kind of this disconnect between like I was like in deep denial about it. So like I didn't want to talk to them really, and like I was kind of like like my mom could like bring it up like, oh, you should get help, you know what I mean? And so like I kind of like distanced myself from them, and then like a lot of my friends, they had seen what Anna went through and like were I think really worried, so like they kind of like when I wasn't immediately getting help, they kind of like distanced themselves too. And then so I ended up like kind of getting a new support system of people who like who had only known me when I was manic. And so so like Anna and I are so close, like anytime that there's like any sort of like rupture in our relationship, like there's for sure like this like really profound loneliness, because when you're a twin, you have this person who like is always there for you and has had like the exact same experiences as you, has the same family, for us has like for the most part the same friends. So when during specifically our manic episodes, like we both had like this the symptom of being like pretty hyper aggressive, and like so that was like a weird that was like a really lonely time for me. And like I remember like I would like just bicycle throughout DC and be like I'm alone, and like I just gone through a breakup, and so I like didn't have that support either. So for me it was like simultaneously being like really charismatic and like hyper personable, and also like not having like very like deep relationships, so like being pretty lonely in that regard. And obviously like my like criteria for who I was like trying to surround myself with was like very different than what it normally is. So it was a lot of people who like didn't really have my best interests in mind and stuff like that. So weirdly depression is super lonely like inside your own head, but I had my support system was more back because like I finally was like getting help and treatment.
I think like the thing that makes like being manic difficult too is that you're like you can't disagree with someone who's manic. Like it just you're not supposed to, like you can't really argue with them because they they always think that they're right and that like you're against them, and like you're like you get really paranoid. So like if someone's disagreeing with you, like they don't have like your best interest at heart. So so trying to have like a support system during that time is like really hard. Like I was really lucky because I was pretty immediately hospitalized, and I had like a very good support like of like my family and stuff like that. But I felt really misunderstood the entire time. Like I felt like everyone was against me, and like it took me coming out of it to start like accepting that like they had been like correct about a lot of things. But like and like when Maria like was manic, that it was kind of the same thing where like you would try to get like you would try to be there for someone, you try to offer help, but like you can't say something that they disagree, like you can't argue with them, or like you can't disagree with them without it becoming like a huge thing. And obviously there's a lot of things that we were not seeing eye to eye on at the time, so it made it really hard. you also don't understand, like, when you're manic, like, how much you're asking of people around you as well. I think when you're depressed, you're, like, hyper aware of how much you're asking of people around you. Like, you think it's, like, you're asking, like, way too much of someone for them to, like, like, Maria was always, like, when she was depressed, she was like, you're so nice for hanging out with me. I was like, I'm just glad I have my sister back. Like, you did not like talking to me for the past 4 months. Like, that sucks. Like, this is fine. But, like, so, like, it's just, like, two very different things. And I think, like, you're a lot easier to offer support to, because you're a lot more, like, docile and, like, accepting of help when you're depressed. Like, you don't want to ask for it, but if someone, like, you're at least for us, like, we were able to accept help.
I don't know if you had the same experience, Sharon, where you're just like, I just want, like, if there's any solution to this, like, I want out.
If anything, I was probably actually, when I got severely anxious and or depressed, I was asking too much to the wrong people, I think, at times.
Totally.
And it showed me the limits of certain friendships, where some friends are like, I have the bandwidth for this, and some friends are like, whoa, no, okay. And it
and, like,
I lost I particularly can think of one friend that I lost over a situation I was in.
We've lost friends too, because, like, I mean, you, like, for depression, I think that, like, you can, I mean, I think that you're in a spot where, like, you can start asking a bit more of people because you need it, and, like, certain friends, right, they'll be there for you. But it's hard because, like, when you're manic, like, I was really, like, mean and aggressive to certain people, and, like, I can't really blame them for not wanting to be around it. And, like, if that's not something that they can handle, if they don't know anybody else who has the disease, like, for example, I'm thinking of one close friend that Anne and I have, who we were, like, best friends in high school, and, like, she moved back to the DC area after college, and so we were all in the same place, but it just happened to coincide with, like, right after her depressive, like, most recent depressive episode, and, like, then my manic episode, and I, like, was screaming at her on the phone, and, like, really just like super, and, like, maybe the friendship was, like, bound to fail anyways, but, like, I can't blame her for not wanting to, like, be screamed at, like,
right.
And it was, like, hard to, like, sorry, my cat is, like,
it's all right. That's the joy of live interviews.
You want to show them Kimmy? You want to show them your cat?
Kimmy!
Hi, Kimmy.
But I think, like, that's the thing too. Like I, as, like, a loved one, as someone, like, who's going through that, like, you try your hardest to, like, protect them and, like, play, like, well, at least I did, like, play, like, middle person and, like, translate and be like, she's not herself right now. Like, this is not, like, she doesn't mean any of what she's saying. But then when Maria would say it to me, I'd be like, like, that's so weird, like, it's the same thing. So,
and so being a twin, there's that very special connection. With the twin, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about it. The twin connection kind of play into loneliness too, because of that 1 year where things were different.
Totally. So the year after, so Anna got diagnosed a full year before I even had my manic episode. So, like, there was a year where, like, we had just gone through this, like, horrific trauma together, but, like, completely, like, I was the one who hospitalized her, she was the one in the hospital. So, like, there's this huge disconnect, and, like, we, like, I think we touched on this in, like, our most recent episode that we just recorded, but, like, there's this year of, like, growing up, like, there is, like, this untwinning a little bit, where you just start having different experiences. I'm so sorry, can you hear the construction noise outside my window?
No.
Okay, great. So there's, like, there's, like, this year of, like, there's, like, this process of, like, untwinning, because, like, we hadn't spent more than, like, one night apart from each other, like, our whole up until we went to college. So, like, but that year in particular was, like, very difficult, because we couldn't understand each other, because we just genuinely were, like, having completely different experiences. And so but then it's weird, like, me getting diagnosed, as horrific as it was for me, and, like, as scary as it was for Anna to watch me go through it, when we came out the other side, like, we were so much closer, because we could finally understand each other. And, like, I'm not saying that you should, like, I would think that she would rather I just, like, had not have the disorder, you know, like
Right,
she would
right.
Yeah.
she would say that, but it did make us closer, and so we are on the wavelength again where like we can talk about it. And
Yeah.
What did
I
that year
think
feel like, Anna?
it was really hard.
Yeah.
So I was depressed for a lot of it too. Like I had been hospitalized when I was manic. And then I went through a 2-week partial hospitalization program, which is like when you go through like outpatient therapy, and then I started this internship, but it was supposed to be like my last semester of college, and I was doing like an internship instead of finishing up, because I was done with classes, but I was in a really not good relationship at the time as well, which like led to the distance too. Like it was very much so like it was a very isolating experience, and Maria was there for me as much as she could be, but it wasn't really like possible for her to be as close to me as she normally would. And then it was funny, like that, like one of like the hardest things about when Maria started being manic, but when she hadn't been diagnosed yet, was that she understandably, like that was like the last thing that she wanted to be diagnosed with. So she would say things to me about like how like she definitely wasn't bipolar, and like she could never be, and like that was it just made me feel it made me really feel like the black sheep in my family, that I was like the one who like had like this bad disease, and
like put our family through that, or
through like a lot of trauma, and like it just kind of like I had a lot of depressed episodes before, so I had already like thought of myself as like the like failure of the family, and this like kind of like confirmed it, but also gave me a reason for why things had been so hard for me in the past. So that was nice, but yeah, it made it really hard to talk about because I didn't know anyone who had been out of their mind. I mean, my biggest fear growing up was becoming crazy. Like that was like my biggest fear. I was like, I don't want
that's one of my biggest fears. It's like going crazy and not being able to come back, and it's scary that it's almost a rational fear, and I hate it more than anything.
It sucks, like not being able to control your own thoughts. I didn't drink for a while because of that reason too, and like so like that's like come true. I was like,
you don't drink? I don't drink.
Maria doesn't drink either.
So
like it's like it's really scary, like not to be in control of your own thoughts. And I think there's a part of, I don't know, I've always thought there's like a part of me that's like like that my body probably couldn't handle it, and like that I needed to like not do those things. I don't know, like I don't know what that intuition is, because it's interesting that all of us had that. But yeah, so I like was like felt very betrayed by like my own mind and like all those things. And it was
people. Oh, sorry.
No, it's hard.
They say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I used to hate hearing that so much because I would hear it at points where I wasn't fully out of the mental like breakdown hiccup I was in. So I wasn't stronger. And I was like, I hate this statement. I think it's crap. Now I don't know how to feel about it, since I am luckily right now on the other side of things. But so I'm like, I'm stronger right now. But like, no, it's a month or a year, like the cards could crumble, which is so infuriating.
I know. There used to be like this quote when I was manic, like every like self-help quote like was really profound to me, but the one that has like actually sorry?
No, you say yours and I'll tell. Sorry.
The one that has stuck is like I don't think it's particularly helpful to tell other people like that like their trauma is going to help them, or like that this is going to be like a helpful experience for them, but like the quote that stuck to me was like this is like the dirt that like your seed has to grow in, or something like that. Like I know it's like very cheesy, but that was helpful. I was like, like you got this, like you're making this podcast. I mean, it sounds like a lot of it was inspired through your own struggles and like your own loneliness, and we feel really like fortunate to be making this podcast right now and having a way to connect. And I think it's made me better at the work that I do. So like Maria was saying, I work on a crisis hotline, and it's for sexual assault survivors. And so a lot of the people coming in are having reactions and thoughts that don't make a lot of sense. And it's helpful that I know like that you're not always you know, like their thoughts are coming from like a valid place. Like there's a reason why like they're thinking these things, and it's not for us to like tell them like what's right or what's wrong. And also like in terms of like people who don't want to report what happened or don't want to involve the system, like it was not fun to be like institutionalized. Like it was not a very like it's
That sounds lonely.
yeah, it was lonely. It was really lonely. And
you heard it here first, folks. Like being hospitalized, not that much fun.
I mean, there were good parts to it. There was some good. I have some good memories, but I would definitely like understand people's hesitations to like involve the system in their problems, because oftentimes the answers that they have are just not like it's like a hammer on like I don't know what's a good metaphor. It's like you're using like a machine gun for a fly that's in your house. I don't know what I meant, but it's just like they throw so much at it, and it's oftentimes more harmful than it's helpful, or harmful on top of being helpful.
Yeah. My story was that when I was manic, I like had to go to the DMV to register my 2014 Toyota Prius. And see Toyota Prius. And so I like bike rode down there for whatever reason. I guess because the DMV there wasn't really parking by it. And I forgot my contacts, or I forgot my glasses, so I like almost like couldn't get my driver's license, my DC driver's license, because like I almost like couldn't pass I wouldn't have passed the eyesight test, but like by some miracle I had contacts in my bag. Anyways, and so there was this thing where you could like they had these like flowers on the wall where you could like write a quote to some like an inspirational quote, and I was like, I have all the answers, and I wrote like I filled that flower up with like 40 quotes.
Makes so much sense. Yeah.
And I was like, this is life's answers. Gotcha. You know, like you have this like arrogance about you that's just like amazing, and like I aim to replicate it like as much like definitely like listen to other people, but like the confidence that you have when you're manic, there's nothing like it. Like it's,
you just think you're like the smartest person in every room. You're just like, I got this.
I know. And I'm already like a little arrogant, so it's not helpful.
I know. And everyone's just like, you are talking so fast and you're not making any sense, and you're just like, because you're not listening. It's like, no, you're just literally not making any sense.
Yeah, and Anna and I both already talk pretty fast, as people can tell. So I was like, that's not a symptom, that's just me, guys.
That's who I am,
So what does loneliness physically feel like for you guys? Like for me, it actually feels like heartbreak, which I've always found really interesting.
That's interesting. Let me think. I think I feel it like in my heart as well. And like my shoulders tense up when I feel that way. It's interesting though, because like you can feel lonely when you're like surrounded by people, and you can not feel lonely when you're by yourself and stuff like that. I feel like it's not really an emotion that's like so based on circumstances. It's more based on like how you're thinking about things, which makes when you're mentally ill, like and your thoughts aren't totally like the ones that you're choosing yourself, like it can just like I feel like it can just like hit. But I don't know, Anna, how does it feel in your body?
I don't know. I think I have trouble distinguishing like my anxiety from other emotions, but like it just feels like very present in my chest, I would say. Like one thing that came out of my manic episode was like I'm big into like breath work now. Like I feel like that's really helpful. So I feel like that's kind of like it's like you're holding your breath kind of, but that's how I think all of my heart emotions feel.
It's like a clenching.
And what about, you guys had touched on different relationships you were in that ended when there were episodes going on. I always struggle with, I think having a partner would help with some of my loneliness, not all of it, because it is a state of mind that has so many facets. But I do wrestle with being someone who's lonely and wants a partner, but has mental health struggles when I disclose that to someone who I'm getting close to. And it's always a stressor, because I'm like, okay, they should know as soon as possible so they have all the information and can leave what they want. Or, you know, but my mom's always like, you don't have to throw that all out there at first. And I'm like, but isn't it fair that I do? I don't know.
The difference between like privacy and like keeping secrets. That
was like something that I had to figure out. So yeah, like the relation that I was in when it ended, like that was obviously something where they hadn't really signed up for someone with like mental health issues, and then they got someone with a lot of mental health issues, and it ended for very different reasons. It was lonely for very different reasons, just as like a very isolating relationship. But like after that, I kind of used like what I had been through and like my diagnosis as a way of like trying to create false intimacy with people. I didn't realize I was doing that, but like I would like disclose way too early. Like I would have just like started like talking to someone, like had like on like one date with them, and I would, because I thought it, to me it was like you're saying, you're like, I want you to have all the information, but it was also, I think, a way for me to like be like, you know, like this is my damage, and like this is how like this is really interesting that like I've been through this, and like you like have to like handle all this stuff. But it's not, I think everyone has things that make them like not someone else's cup of tea, and like you definitely like I mean, I definitely want someone who's like able to handle like, who's like aware of mental illness, like understands it. But I don't need it to be, I think in the past it was kind of a way of inviting someone else to like disclose their own like issues and trauma, and like I don't think you necessarily need to be doing that.
I think it comes I think it comes out of like naturally or eventually, like I don't know, like I mean, it's interesting, like when you, but like as we were talking about, like when you do start disclosing to people, like a lot of times they, again, like know somebody who has it or have it themselves. So like I think in that regard it can be like kind of an antidote to loneliness. But yeah, I agree with Anna, like especially when you're like in a relationship with somebody who's already like said kind of negative things about people with bipolar disorder or whatever, like it's makes it more difficult to disclose. But I think it's also like if you can use that moment to like educate people and like kind of like clear up their misconceptions and stuff like that, and like you're in a place where you're stable and like well enough to do so. I know Anna and I like sometimes disagree about this, but I think that it's like you can also like make that relationship work if you want to. And but yeah, it is hard to know like the timing. I think if you can kind of figure out a way to do it that like feels safe to you, and like allows them the space. One thing that Anna and I talk about is like, it's kind of like when you tell, like people talk about when you're grieving and you like disclose that like, oh, my like important relative or whomever died, and like people can have such a range of emotions and responses to it, and they don't know necessarily what you want them to say. I think you can give them the answer to what you want. You can say, hey, I'm gonna like disclose something to you, and like I'd like for me, I want them to ask questions. For Anna, I think you want something a little bit different, but I think you can give them the response, and I think it's really helpful for people to know.
Otherwise someone's flailing and is like, oh
exactly.
Like, okay.
If they're trying to like be like, oh, that's like fine, it's like no big deal, but you're like, actually this like kind of a big deal to me, and especially with like depression and anxiety, it's like there's a lot of misconceptions about that, and like I'd love to clear them up for you, you know.
I think like the other thing, like in terms of like when to disclose too, like I think the reasoning behind it is usually like you want someone who's like able to handle those things, like that won't be like a deal breaker for them. But I don't think anyone knows like what it's like until you're going through it, and like you can't even like describe like the next time that happens, like what it's gonna look like and stuff like that. So like I think like just kind of vetting someone as like a kind, compassionate person, like them getting that back from you, and then like when it feels safe and when it feels like you know, when it just like feels like the right time for you. And it's also like it's okay not to disclose immediately. Like I think there's just like, I think that we're taught like that like this illness like is one of those ones that you like have to, like mental illness, like you have to get it out on the table, but there's so many things that people bring into like each situation. So like you know, they could not want to date you for a million other reasons as well too.
Yeah,
like,
and they could have undiagnosed mental illness, you know, and like
True.
so
yeah.
like I've
Like
had several times when I tell people that I have bipolar disorder, like they're like, oh yeah, I think I might have it too, and you're like, you don't want to get that checked out, or you're going to just like let that like lie.
Yeah. And so if loneliness showed up in your life as an embodied form, what would you say to him or her or it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
My first reaction is thank you, which is really weird. I don't know why.
Interesting. Wait, tell me more.
I guess you can learn a lot from it, can't you? Like all of my biggest periods of growth have kind of started with that. Like, or any new experience or challenge is gonna be lonely at first, I think. Like I've moved several times, obviously, in my life, and like moving out to LA last year was really, I didn't know anybody out here. It was really lonely, but like that loneliness kind of drove me to like really immerse myself in like different communities and like say yes to like every invitation that was offered me and like network and get coffee or whatever, you know. So like I think I mean weirdly, like if you can live with loneliness, like find like a peace with it, like if you can be, I mean something that's like really hard for me as a twin and just like kind of a person who really craves being around people all the time, like driving out here for 3 weeks like by myself was like weirdly lonely, but like you have to be able to like sit with it, I think, like because I wouldn't have gotten to see all these towns and stuff like that, and like I really had like a great time for the most part. So like I think that it's really hard to like soul search and like figure out your next steps and stuff. Like you have to like around other people when you're like keeping yourself so busy. So if you can find like a peace with it, I think it actually can be a really useful emotion, which I didn't expect to be a thing that I
so we got one thank you. What else do we
I know, I was gonna say I mean I think that there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, like so it's hard for me to like because I feel like the times that I felt the loneliest in my life are times that I've had like people around me, like in that relationship was like the loneliest that I've ever felt, and probably like that period of my life was like the loneliest I've ever felt. So but I kind of like want to say thank you too. I was like, I'm talking about a hug, like just because.
Are we like completely self-actualized? Are we?
No,
we're gonna ascend right now.
Ourselves. Because I just also just like cried 2 days ago. She was like, I think, but also I'm like, I've said this before, like in different places, but I'm someone who likes to wallow in like those kind of feelings. Like that's like, I have like ways of getting rid of it, but I also like to sit with it for a while. And I feel like you do learn a lot from the times that you feel the loneliest. Like it has taught me that I should get out of a relationship that I was supposed to be in. It taught me, that I wasn't supposed to be in. It taught me like that I needed to work harder to like get myself like a support group and like a group of, and like work harder to be a part of like the group of friends that I was in and stuff like that. Like I think that there's a lot, and to get it's also taught me to get out of relationships like many a time. Like that's like usually how I know like this is not serving me anymore if I feel lonelier with this person than without that person. So
you guys, seriously, thank you so much for coming and talking about this.
Oh my god, thank you for having us.
What platforms can the podcast be found on? That's Bipolar Bicoastal.
Yes. Sorry.
All of them.
So it's on all of them. If you search anywhere you get your podcast, Bipolar Bicoastal, it's there. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. We also, if you go on our we have a Facebook group and an Instagram. It's just at Bipolar Bicoastal. So you can we post new episodes there every time that they come out. So you can, there's like a link you can click as well. Yeah, but I will also send you the links to put
Perfect. We'll put
down below.
everything in the notes
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
You guys, thank you both so much.
No, this
Thanks
was so
for having
fun.
us, Sharon.
Yeah.
It was a delight.
What a
Really appreciate it.
you were
All
a
right,
great
well,
interviewer. This is
podcast.
such good questions.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right,
This is
good
so
luck to
nice.
us all on our podcast.
I know.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Fuck Loneliness. I'm your host, Sharon Pieczenik. And if you have any questions or comments, please email me at fckloneliness@gmail.com. I look forward to having you with me at the next episode.